The year 2020 is considered the worst year of the 20th century, and for a good reason. The outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic hit the world so hard that not only the world was boring and not social anymore, but it also caused the death of so many people. Now, as a medieval nerd that I am, it got me thinking, well, what could be worse than this? But to my surprise, there has been many deadly diseases in the Middle Ages, which were not only more deadly than COVID-19, but also caused the death of millions of more people. So what were these deadly diseases? How did the people of the Middle Ages survive in it without any modern medical medicines and cures? To find this out, let's travel back in time to the Middle Ages. Black Death. Now, when you first hear this word Black Death, you should have seen this picture of a weird black crow man. This terrifying looking crow man was actually a costume that the doctors used to wear to prevent them from this deadly disease's Black Death. The Black Death was a plague. A plague is a serious infectious disease caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis, a zoonotic bacteria, usually found in small mammals and their fleas. It is transmitted between animals through fleas. The plague Black Death reached the Mediterranean ports of southern Europe in 1347 and in 3 years swept throughout Europe. The chief method of combating this plague was to isolate known or suspected cases, as well as persons who had been in contact with them. The period of isolation at first was about 14 days and gradually was increased to 40 days. Stirred by the Black Death, public officials created a system of sanitary control to combat contagious diseases, using observation stations, isolation hospitals, and disinfection procedures. Major efforts to improve sanitation included the development of pure water supplies, garbage and sewage disposal, and food inspection. These efforts were especially important in the cities, where people lived in crowded conditions in a rural manner, with many animals around their homes. Many early steps in the field of public health were taken throughout the Middle Ages. Hospitals were established, medical care and social assistance were provided, efforts were made to address the unhygienic conditions of the towns and, through the use of quarantine, to prevent the spread of disease. Yersinia pestis, a bacillus bacteria, was the origin of this disease and was spread by fleas on rodents. However, new research indicates that human parasites like lice may have also played a role. The reason it was named the Black Death was that it might produce fever, joint problems, and black lesions on the skin. General practitioners in a town were more likely to become infected by the plague during outbreaks due to their greater exposure. Hence, it was safer to assign specific doctors to plague patients. Many of the doctors who remained were inexperienced, since many established doctors left their homes and private practices rather than risk contracting the sickness. Some became the only physicians ready to treat plague patients, even if others had no medical expertise at all. These individuals were either just graduated from medical school or experienced doctors having difficulty obtaining employment. Many of the tasks carried out by plague doctors actually fell beyond the purview of medicine. These included keeping casebooks and notebooks to aid in the discovery of remedies or preventive measures, performing autopsy, witnessing wills, and keeping track of the number of infections and deaths. It is estimated that between 30% and 50% of the population of those affected locations perished from the Black Death, with up to 2/3 of victims dying from the epidemic. The death toll was so great that it had a profound effect on medieval European society as a whole. Due to a lack of farmers, there were calls for the abolition of serfdom, widespread rebellions and questions of authority, and many towns and villages were completely abandoned. It would take 200 years for the population of Europe to return to its pre-Black Death levels, making it the greatest scourge in human history. The Black Death completely upended the economy. Thousands of expert craftsmen and merchants perished as a result, upsetting commerce and delaying production in addition to the consumers who purchased their goods. Arable land went fallow, forcing workers paid to sore landlords, eager to get someone to work their property, were compelled to renegotiate farmers' wages. The rigid inherited class divides that had kept peasants confined to local lords' land for generations were undermined by widespread mortality. People found it difficult to comprehend what was going on. Fearful people in Western Europe frequently resorted to Christianity, because many of those affected left their property to the church in an attempt to secure a place in heaven. The church prospered as a result. But the church's authority took a hit as well. Some blamed the catastrophe on the astrological skies that revealed Saturn in the house of Jupiter. Plague of Justinian. The plague, casued by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, appears to have started in Lower Egypt about 541 and then spread across the Mediterranean in the ships that transported grain to the center of the empire. In the spring of 542, the first few instances were reported in Constantinople. The illness quickly spread and raged for 4 months. To get rid of the decaying dead, Justinian had large trenches to be dug. When these overflowed, the bodies were either placed onto ships that were pushed out into the Sea of Marmara and set ablaze, or they were crammed into the towers of the city walls and covered in quicklime to hasten their decomposition. In the past, scholars thought that rats were the primary vectors of the disease, meaning that they were the animals that carried the fleas, which act as hosts to the bacteria, which in turn infected humans. However, we now think that humans, who can also carry fleas and lice, spread the disease to each other directly rather than rats. Over the course of the following 2 centuries, there were intermittent outbreaks of the plague throughout Western Europe, where it eventually became endemic. But by 590, the worst had passed. The fatality rate during this outbreak cannot be determined with certainty. There are estimates ranging from 25 million to 100 million deaths. About a third of Europe's population had been wiped out. Not until the 14th century, when the Black Death ravaged Europe, would a pandemic on the scale of the plague of Justinian be experienced again. Antonine Plague. The Antonine Plague, sometimes referred to as the Plague of Galen, erupted in 165 CE, at the height of Roman power throughout the Mediterranean world, during the reign of the last of the 5 good emperors. The symptoms for this plague were fever, diarrhea, vomiting, thirstiness, swollen throat, and coughing. The sickness lasted for around 2 weeks in those who were afflicted. Not everyone who contracted the illness passed away, and those who did gained resistance to future epidemics. Modern experts have concluded that the sickness afflicting the empire was probably smallpox, based on Galen's description. At the height of the outbreak, Rome saw an estimated 2,000 deaths per day. Estimates of the fatality rate during the second pandemic were up to 5,000 per day. The high death toll was most likely caused by the fact that people in the Mediterranean region were not previously exposed to this sickness. When infectious diseases are introduced into a virgin population or a group of people who do not have acquired or inherited immunity to a particular disease, mortality increases. There were about 150,000 troops in Rome's 28 legions at the time of the plague breakout. Despite their preparation, training, and armament, the legions were nonetheless susceptible to contracting the sickness, becoming sick, and eventually dying. The legionaries, regardless of their positions, caught the illness from their comrades who had returned from leave to active service. The sick and dying reduced the number of soldiers, particularly around the German borders, making it harder for the Romans to hold the empire. Marcus Aurelius recruited every fit guy who could fight because he was short on soldiers, including gladiators, Germans, freed slaves, and criminals. More broadly, the horrifying death toll decreased the number of taxpayers, army recruits, political candidates, company owners, and farmers. Government income fell at a time when the cost of sustaining the empire and the armed forces required to guarantee its security was rising. Less productivity on the farms, more land left uncultivated, as a result of fewer farmers was the cause of the decline in tax income. Well, so here were some of the most deadliest diseases, aka plagues, of the Middle Ages. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about these? If you like this video and want to see more videos about Middle Ages and history like these, subscribe to my channel, Medieval Mind, and watch my other videos as well. Goodbye.